this is a new pickle. Lily's bakery needs a sink. It's not just that it's inconvenient carrying jugs of water down the garden to mix her dough, or buckets every time she cleans her mixer out when she makes a batch, or that I get fed up with the bakery bins coming down to the domestic kitchen after every bake. She's required by environmental health to have at minimum a hand washing sink in the room where she prepares her food. We looked around at all the options we could find, including portable hand washing stations. And we decided that the most practical solution, the one that would solve the most problems, would be to run a main supply down to the bakery. We both did a load of research into what it would actually require, including calling professionals who never showed up to quote, and pulling tradesmen off the street to ask for their input. This included one surprisingly candid plumber who told me he thought it would take me 3 months if I planned to hand dig a trench that was deep enough to run a water line in it. He implored me to hire a digger, so I began looking into that. The problem with that is we don't have any side access to our backyard. I looked into it though, and I learned that they do make mini excavators that are designed to solve this problem, as they make one that is specifically designed to fit through domestic doorways. I measured up the doorways in the simplest route through the house, which was through the garage and our laundry room out to the back garden, and decided the plan was a goer. So the plan was to dig a trench that was regulation 750 mils deep, into the bottom of which we would pour some sand to bed our blue water pipe. Then we'd top the pipe off with some more sand to protect it from any big rocks in the soil. And when the sand was in, we could begin backfilling it with the dirt that we dug out of the trench in the first place. Then as we had the trench there, we could run an underground drainage pipe back to the sewer by the house, which would be bedded in some hardcore, before topping the trench off with some topsoil, and finally returning the turf to the top, for now at least. Easy, right? My first lesson from this project was that I had no idea how long it was going to take. I guess that I had naively hoped that I could dig the entire trench and scoop all the dirt back in the one weekend I had hired the digger. I picked a weekend to hire the excavator and ordered some supplies for the job to be delivered before the digger arrived. I got some incredibly long drain pipes ordered, as well as the blue water pipe, and a wild guess at how much sand we were going to need to pack the pipe in. The delivery truck's ginormous robotic arm also handed me a sheet of cheap plywood, which I got to make some ramps over the door transitions in the laundry room. The ramps were a simple success, something I really should have made a few years ago, and I gave them their first test by rolling our incredibly full garden waste bin over the ramps and back through to the front of the house. The digger arrived, courtesy of the Greek god of love, sex and plant hire, bright and early on Saturday morning. My first challenge proved to be working out how to even get it started, followed by how to change the bucket. But soon enough I was ready for the main event of getting it through the house. It cleared the first hurdle of getting under our garage door. So after a mission briefing with Lily,
like, if you get wedged in the doorway, what's going to happen?
The next phase was getting it through the door into the laundry room.
I'm just saying in case it was a fit.
Yeah.
Oh my Jesus Christ.
This went okay. It was completely absurd that we were there with this diesel pumping little excavator in our laundry room. But the battle was half won at this point. There was just one more doorway. And so, after taking stock of where we were at and where we wanted to go, we went for it. We got as far as basically being able to swing the arm of the digger out of the door, but then we realised we couldn't get any further. This was incredibly stressful. We stopped and assessed the situation again and again. The problem was that the second door wasn't a straight shot out from the first one, and we were all of about 2 centimetres of floor space out of being able to swing the digger around and out to the freedom of the back garden.
Yeah.
And so I was afforded lesson number 2 of this project, which is don't underestimate the digger's length, even though I measured the width and height successfully. And as much as I kick myself for that now, it would have been a hard one to measure unless I made a cardboard template or something. It wasn't just frustrating that I wasn't getting the digger through to the garden where we needed it, but it created a new stressful situation in itself, which was the prospect of reversing it back out of the laundry room. Lily again helped guide me back out and over my ramp again.
You have to turn, Ricky. You have to turn. Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, you're down.
And when I made it back out to the front of the house, I declared,
Yeah, that was in the top 10 of my most stressful experiences I've ever had.
little did I know what else the weekend had in store for me.
I'm just shocked that you voluntarily wanted to drive to stage.
The only possibility we were left with to get it back into the backyard and to start digging was to bring it through our neighbour's side access. But of course, they were all out for the day, so we had to work out what jobs we could do without the digger before we could ask our nice neighbours for permission to bring the digger through their property. So while we waited, Lily lifted the paving slabs that were in the line of fire. And after we debated exactly where we were going to run this water line in our surprisingly wonky garden, I began breaking the cement that was in our way at the other end. This was all useful work to be doing anyway, so it wasn't all bad. And when our neighbour did get home, he did very kindly grant us permission to pop a fence panel out and bring it on through. Doing this proved to be laughably easy, but I'm so disappointed that I couldn't get through the laundry room as I hoped. We were finally in place with the machine in the back garden though, and at about 4:30 in the afternoon we could finally begin digging. Starting the digging taught me lesson number 3, which is that dirt's got to go somewhere. I was bracing myself for there being a lot more dirt coming out of the trench than it looks like there should, but I hadn't really considered where it was going to go.
Hey, it's coming, it's coming. Yeah, there you go. Gross.
The most crucial part of this lesson is that you probably want it to go somewhere in arm's reach of the digger itself, so you're not constantly driving the digger back and forth to your dump pile. We ended up putting some plastic sheets down on the lawn in parallel with the path of the digger and our trench, which worked okay. And with maybe 20% of the trench dug, we were thoroughly exhausted, physically and emotionally, and it was time to call it a night. In the morning, Frisbee inspected what we dug the night before and declared it as conforming to regulation. I began getting into the swing of operating the machine, managing to stop thinking about what my hands were doing on the controls and start thinking about what movements I wanted the digger arm to make instead. Operating the digger wasn't any more physically taxing than playing a video game, in theory, but it was surprisingly exhausting. Accordingly, I managed to convince Lily to drive it so we could take the work in shifts, and that worked out pretty well. Being off the digger while it was being operated was interesting because I could see a bit more of what was going on while it's being driven. Sometimes, if you tried to scoop too much out of a spot too heavy with clay, the digger would rear up and emit a dirty fart from its exhaust, which was pretty funny to see. We ran into the anchor for an old laundry tree right in our path of digging, but gladly the digger had enough oomph to lift it out for us.
Wow, well done.
We made good progress though, and we created so much dirt, which wasn't exactly a surprise. When we got closer to the house end of the trench, I realised we had a new problem, which was that our conservatory was right in the line of where we were dumping out the bucket. Thinking on my feet, I grabbed an old ton bag and we started filling that. Enter lesson number 4. The tonnage rating is how heavy the machine is, not how much it can lift. It dawned on us that this bag that we were filling was exactly in front of the fence panel we removed to get the machine into our garden. And the machine was scheduled to be collected the next day. And so I learned my lesson, that it could barely drag our bag. And we lost the last bit of the evening emptying it again, enough to move it out of the way of the digger's exit.
The next morning I checked with the hire company that I had enough time to finish the digging before they came to pick the machine up, and Lily went off to her day job. I could hear the sound of some nearby tree surgeons at work, so I didn't feel too bad about getting the digger going early as well. And so I set about digging the last few metres of my trench. I was thinking about it overnight and I realised that another problem is that because we're digging the trench from building to building, or as close to it as possible, we were eventually going to get to a point where the digger was straddling the trench. The way I got around that was to put the rest of that piece of plywood I got for the ramps down over the trench and drive the digger onto it, which taught me lesson number 5. Have 2 boards so you can drive off of one and onto the other when you need to move them. I reversed the digger off the board so I could move it to a more useful location, and when I looked at my tracks I didn't like how close one of them was to the edge of my trench. I hopped off the machine and proceeded to try and steer it back away from the edge when the thing slipped right into the trench.
Well, this is a new pickle.
I'm not sure if I'm happy or sad that I don't have more footage than just this time lapse, because I descended into a massive panic attack. One track was down in the trench and the other was up in the air. I was worried it was going to slip further and become even more of a disaster. I grabbed a couple of ratchet straps I had, and I tethered them to the heaviest thing I could see, which was Lily's agricultural trough flower beds. I tried ratcheting the digger up, and it just dragged my troughs out into the digger's path. I tried using the digger's arm to push it back up out of the hole, as well as I could manage too. My friend Tom had the misfortune of texting me and asking how the digging was going just when this happened, so I phoned him in a panic. Tom was a good friend, and he restrained his ridicule while we tried to figure out what on earth to do. We basically came up with 2 possibilities. Both involved phoning the hire company and admitting what I'd done. One option was asking them for help, expecting them to be used to situations like this, as they hire these diggers out to fools like me all the time. The other option was to just pay for a couple more days on the rental so I could figure the situation out myself. Of course, just as we were considering this, an incoming call came in on my phone, and it was the hire company asking,
Hey Ricky, are you done with that digger yet?
I told them what had happened, and hoping for strategy 1 proved to be a lost cause, as I was met with a very heavy silence and we're going to have a team meeting and get back to you. Next I tried to send my drone up to get a photo of the access situation, and that made things worse as well, as the drone freaked out and it began to crash land too. I had to try and catch and wrestle it out of the sky, which was ridiculous. But once I got the drone grounded safely, I began hearing the rest of the sounds of the day again, and that included the tree surgeons. It so happened that they were working in the school around the corner from me, so I ran out of my house and crawled through the hole in the fence the kids used to escape. And I interrupted their tree surgery to say, I got a problem here, and it's not with you. I proceeded to tell them what happened, and they incredibly kindly offered to help me, crawling back through the gap in the fence with me and arriving in my yard to see the state of things. Between us, we managed to tip it back upright while one of the surgeons drove it back onto stable ground for me. They were so kind. I made them all a well-earned cup of tea in return for their help. before I gladly drove the digger back out to the front of the house and implored the hire company to come and take it away from me. With the digger out of my hair, I still had a couple more things to tidy up before I could consider the trench successfully dug. One thing I was more successful with on the morning I crashed the digger was finding where the workshop's electricity cable ran. We knew it went underground here and came up in the bakery over here. So it had to cross our trench at some point, and that ended up being practically at the last part I dug. I was glad it was an armoured cable, because even though I caught it with the excavator's bucket, the only thing that ended up harmed was the plastic junction box the cable was anchored into. That was easy to replace though. Aside from the very rusty old nut that fastened the cable to the box. And it allowed me to feel slightly less out of control of this project. There was also a little bit of manual digging to do still. We encountered another pipe by the conservatory, which may or may not be for a soakaway that may or may not even be in use, and we needed to pass our water line under it. I also tidied up a channel to bring the line back up at the house end. And finally we had ourselves a trench.
What a good girl.
No sooner was it dug than it was time to start filling it back in again. Now I could see the trench and tip a bag of sand into it. I learned that I grossly underestimated, how much sand we were going to need. And it was a bank holiday weekend here, so we had no chance of getting any more delivered. We ended up going to pick up all that Lily's car could manage, and that allowed us to lay our blue water pipe halfway down the trench at least.
Is that safe cutting right onto it?
Frisbee had no interest in helping dig when we were trying to remove dirt from the trench, but for some reason she was really keen on kicking up our sand.
We should have been doing this last weekend.
So as we couldn't immediately get enough sand to fill the other half of the trench,
Frisbee, your paws are glowing.
I figured we should cover what we did have with some dirt,
Did you find some treasure?
if for no other reason than to stop her digging our pipe back up. Because the sand was there to avoid crashing anything into our pipe, it seemed like good sense to me to not mechanically compact the dirt immediately above the waterline either. So I made the decision to sift the first layer of dirt we put back into the ditch. This took out any big rocks that could be even remotely risky to our pipe, and it removed any big bits of clay too, and that would make it easier to manually compact. Sifting it was a lot of work, but it made me feel better about the process of filling it in, and it gave my pipe the best shot at success. Remarkably, we ended up having only one day of bad weather while we were working on this project, and it was when we were at this halfway mark of laying the pipe. It turned our trench into a canal for a day, and it caused a couple of small landslips that I had to muck out. But with one last batch of sand delivered, my ramps proved their continued usefulness, and I could lay the rest of the pipe. I had read that snaking the pipe was a good idea, to avoid it being put under tension if anything expands or contracts, and allowing it to snake also justified the width of the trench, and the massive amount of sand that it ended up swallowing. Threading the pipe under our mystery drain was inelegant, but it did end up working, and with it all sanded in, I returned to sifting dirt to cover the sand. It made a degree of sense to me to bury the water line as deep as we did, to avoid any chance of it freezing. But what made less sense is how to avoid that happening where it transitioned between the bottom of the trench and ground level. The plumbers I spoke to both said it just needed lagging with insulation, so I looked around and I ordered some that professed to be outdoor grade, but it still seemed like it was a little bit flimsy against my heavy soil. It turns out the part of the story I was missing was ducting, some reinforced PVC piping to put the pipe in. I managed to find some ducting that I liked the look of, and Frisbee liked the look of it too. Despite ordering a size with an inner diameter 3mm bigger than the outer diameter of the insulation I got, it was still a nightmare to slot them together. Gladly, I had a couple of millimetres to spare on the lagging's inner diameter too, so I sliced a couple of millimetres out of the opening and that allowed me to wrestle it in more effectively, with the help of a little talcum powder. With the lagging and the ducting together, I slipped it onto the blue pipe, and suddenly I felt so much better about its transition. So now I had the blue water pipe buried in at least a little bit of soil. Before I went any further, I figured I should test it. Gladly it held pressure perfectly, so we were ready to start more general backfilling. One question we were asked multiple times when doing this project is if we found any buried treasure. I think the best we found were a couple of pieces of Victorian china, so I decided to play it forward, and I buried a little something in a plastic container I sealed up with some silicone, for someone in the distant future to discover. Speaking of discovery, Lily discovered an aptitude for shoveling the dirt back into the hole. So it was time to bring out the big guns. Thankfully, the hire company didn't ban me from their store following the debacle with the digger, and we got a compactor plate to start refilling the trench. As usual, it took me longer than I felt like it should to get it started. Then when we got into the trench, the ditch was just slightly too narrow in a couple of spots to get it through. With our tight trench, we ended up discovering it was easier as a two-person job, so Lily pulled it while I pushed it. We did a few more layers like this, then we stopped when we got to an appropriate depth for the drain pipe to go.
Finally, it was time to lay the drain pipes.
The drain was probably the least copacetic part of this job. Because we had the trench dug for the water line, and that the trench went right up to the inspection chamber for a drain, it kind of seemed like there was not much to lose by trying to send a really long drain back to the system. I had to do a little bit of wrestling to swap the elbow that comes from our washing machine to a T we could tap into from the bakery. I went to unnecessary efforts with the piece to insert between the T. But once I did get it all in, the longer stretches were much easier to push fit in. What was much harder was getting any kind of fall on the pipe. I had to wait until it was dark out to go and assess the situation with my laser level, and I was pretty shocked to find that contrary to what my cameras want to tell me, there was almost no fall whatsoever in my garden, and it's almost completely perfectly level. I guess we have our own personal gravity hill here. The difference at each end was so pancake flat that I had to swap out the gully I got for one with a much smaller drop to be able to get any kind of fall and still land into the inspection chamber. I ended up discovering some builder's lime was the answer to getting it as good as possible. And I did finally get water coming out into the inspection chamber when I poured it down the gully. So I packed the underside of the pipe with some large pieces of rubble to maintain my fall as best as I can. Then I packed the pipe into the trench with smaller rocks before backfilling it with more general soil. And I think that's about as good as I could get it under the circumstances. We also decided that while we had the trench there wasn't much to lose from throwing in an armoured Ethernet cable before we covered it too. I understand that a drain this shallow really should be protected by some concrete, but if the drain proves to be functional after using it for some time, then I'd like to move our path over where the drain lies anyway, and make our planting beds bigger. But that would definitely be another job for another time. With the trench filled back in, we unsurprisingly had a healthy pile of leftover dirt. I didn't really have a plan for what to do with it, but wherever it ended up going, it needed to get out of the garden and to the front of the house, so I began bagging it up in all the empty sandbags. This was hard work, but I made it a little bit easier by buying a cheap bucket and cutting the bottom off to turn it into a makeshift funnel of sorts, which really helped. I felt really bad when I was doing this, as the bees seemed to really like the dirt pile. Every time I'd shovel another layer of dirt away, more would show up looking to make a home in there, and I couldn't really explain to them that the dirt was going away. We got some topsoil to top off the ditch as planned, but we realised it probably wasn't going to fill it up all the way. It seemed like complete madness to buy new dirt when I had so much to get rid of already though. So when the next weekend rolled around, Lily helped me once again sift the good soil out of the last of the dirt we hadn't bagged up, which we then topped off with the store-bought topsoil.
Even though all we had done was put it in bags, it felt like such a victory to clear the dirt pile and get our garden back. It had been a month since we started this project. We ended up filling just under 100 bags of excess dirt. I was lucky to have a couple of neighbours help me get rid of it. One very kindly took me to the recycling centre with a truckload. Then another of my neighbours was doing some groundworks themselves. And so I gave his grab driver a bit of cash to come and pick up what we had left, which was a massive win. With all the dirt gone, I could put the patios back together. The patio by the house was a short-term, minimal viable reassembly, doing my quick best to level some dirt before dropping the pavers back down, which has worked well enough for now. I tried to do a bit more of a long-term job at the workshop end though. I used the slab laying mix for the flagstones, then cemented the gully in and added a bit of rebar for good measure. Then watched Frisbee stamp her paw right into the wet cement. It turned out well enough though. Even with doing all the labour ourselves, it's cost us a little over £1,000 to get this far. It definitely didn't help that we were so inefficient with the sand. We ended up spending about twice as much as we needed to by buying individual bags in multiple trips and deliveries. And it probably would have been a bit more cost effective to just buy a couple of ton bags in the first place. The small bags did, however, save us a load of shovelling work. And they also got reused a couple of times over to get the dirt out of our backyard as well, so it's not a terrible result. I've been asked a couple of times whether we wish we never started this project, but no, I'm glad we've done it. I don't see a better way of having got the job done. And while there are a few things that we would do differently with the experience of having done it once already, one must keep in mind that the point of hindsight is you only get to see it after the fact. So I think we've done alright, all things told. We finally had only the second rainstorm in about 5 weeks, just after we finished filling everything back in, which was a useful stress test. The lawn looks awful now, but hopefully it will be back to normal in a few weeks. And that's a good place to end this video. I still need to plumb the water line into the house, but that can be part of the project of installing the sink into the bakery. Thanks for watching this saga.